Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks Podcast. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help you trust the people and the products you depend on. As you know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist. I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you think about drugs, wonder about devices, obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. This is the interview for you. I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. I'm a pharmacist, but I'm not your pharmacist. So this is neither legal advice nor clinical advice. However, these are considerations and they don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the host, the guest, or their employers. If you like what you hear, please like, leave a comment, please subscribe, please share. You can always ask our guest questions and always reach out to me on Twitter at Darshan Talks or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Today's interview is really interesting because we're going to talk to a 340B expert. And if you're in the pharmacy world, you know that this is something you have to deal with, have to understand. So this is really interesting to me because it's one of those areas that I've stayed away from for the most part. So I get to hear and learn more and more about it. Our guest today is the CEO of Integrated Pharmacy Services, Inc., also known as IPS. She has extensive experience with 340B auditing and consulting services. Our guest today is Rita Baskett RPh. Hey, Rita.
Hi. Good day.
It's good to have you on. So we're going to start with a really basic question because I'm pretty basic. The term 340B, we've heard that sent out multiple times. What does this actually mean? Why should anyone care about it? Why are pharmacies all talking about it?
So wonderful, 340B, and we hear that all the time. What is 340B? It's actually the part of the statute that was written back you put me on the spot with dates, but back in 1992, the Federal Register is the statute that enables manufacturers to give a rebate upfront in the price that we call 340B to covered entities that are eligible to receive that pricing for their outpatient purchases, not inpatient, but outpatient. So it affects all covered entity types from large disproportionate share hospitals to critical access hospitals, HRSA grantees, which are Ryan White's, STD, TB clinics, and federally qualified health centers, community health center world. So they're able to purchase their pharmaceutical drugs for their covered outpatients at a upfront rebate price.
So why is there this upfront rebate price for these groups?
So when the statute was written, it was to enable, as the Federal Register states, to enable scarce resources to these entities to be able to use those resources, basically how they, especially the hospital segment, how they see fit. But when it comes to the grantees, they report this as program income, and they're able to allocate that revenue savings to whatever programs to benefit their service line. So hospitals the same way, but the hospitals don't report it, but the grantees do because it's part of their grant award stipulation. But manufacturers, they participate if they sign a pharmaceutical pricing agreement, the PPA, with the feds. If they want their drug on a Medicare, Medicaid formulary, they have to sign that pharmaceutical pricing agreement. And once they sign that, they have to abide by the 340B statute to provide those discounts to eligible entities.
So it seems like a bit of a hammer. The fact is that if you are a pharmaceutical company, you kind of have to be on Medicare and Medicaid. Like, what are your options? What is 80% of your purchasing power, I believe? So if you're a pharmaceutical company, you kind of automatically need to be part of 340B then. Or at least you need to sign a PPA, which means that theoretically companies will have access to your drugs by 340B. First of all, am I accurate in that assertion?
Yes, you are. And I mean, there are a few manufacturers that do not participate. One is a snake venom drug because they know they have no competition in the marketplace. So if you're in the Midwest and you're you're in California desert and you get bit by a venomous snake, you want that drug. Unfortunately, there's no 340B price for it, and it's extremely expensive. And then you have another manufacturer like the one that makes a injectable acetaminophen, and that drug is old as dirt, but because they created this wonderful injectable form, they have no competition, so they didn't sign a PPA. Unfortunately, there's no 340B price.
Which is interesting to me because I mean, sorry about that. The idea that Tylenol, or it's not Tylenol, as we all know, it's the generic acetaminophen that is now a branded product because it's IV. And I know in Europe it's been available for dog years, for example.
Right.
But the idea that no one's come out and said that we're going to have a generic out there is astounding to me. But we won't get into that part of it. As a pharmacist, I'm just kind of still astounded by that. The part that I'm trying to understand, though, is that what you're saying is these companies have to participate, but what is the onus on the healthcare providers or the healthcare organization to ensure that, because I mean, what stops them from buying all their drug is a 340B because there are additional rebates. It's pretty low cost. And what kind of cost do they have to sort of buy that? Does that question make sense?
Yes, it does. Actually, so depending on the type of entity you have certain compliance restrictions. So there are some regulatory guidance, not rules. I'm going to be very careful what I say there because that's the issue at hand with a lot that's going on in the 340B program is that HRSA, who is the authorizing, let's say they are HRSA, which is a division of CMS, which is a division of HHS, HRSA manages the 340B program through the Office of Pharmacy Affairs. So that's kind of the hierarchy and the government relation of 340B. But HRSA doesn't have rulemaking authority, so all they can issue is a bunch of guidance. So with that, they have several guidances around restrictions based on your entity type. And some of those restrictions were built in when the statute was written in 92. And then in make sure I get my years right, and somebody probably will correct me out there. I believe it when the, oh gosh, see, I knew it was going to come up all the dates. And excuse me for the dates.
Just generally speaking, yeah.
So basically, when the new hospital categories became eligible, they had restrictions built in the law when they became available. So we have different restrictions based on different hospital types. So they have to apply to the compliancy. Like, for instance, large disproportionate share hospitals that register as a DISH entity, they have something called the GPO prohibition violation. Basically, it keeps them from buying their GPO price drugs on their outpatients. And since 340B is totally and only outpatient program, if they violate that prohibition, which is the only thing that can technically get you kicked out of 340B, and you get audited and if they find a GPO prohibition, you're removed from the program until you become in compliance. Other hospital types like sole community hospitals, rural referral centers, critical access hospitals, those are the newly eligible hospitals as of 2012, I believe. They don't have that restriction of a GPO prohibition. So they can do things like cherry pick on their pricing on the outpatient side. But as far as 340B concerned, it is an outpatient only service. And so it started really, if we go back to the original statute, hospitals only started using 340B for retail prescriptions. Then somebody got a bright idea and morphed this into, well, emergency room is outpatient. Observation status is outpatient. Same-day surgery is outpatient. So then we morphed into what we call this now mixed use area, and where we started a whole new can of worms with the program from going to just a retail benefit to a mixed use benefit. So now that added another layer of complexity, where we then had a pop-up of vendors and created a whole new marketplace. So you had all these third-party administrators come out and create software to manage this whole mixed-use inventory, and they exploded. So we got several vendors. And remember, they're for-profit, but the hospitals are not for profit. That's a qualification stipulation to be eligible for 340B. You have to be a nonprofit. But people are surprised, even at some of the type of hospitals that participate that are nonprofit. They didn't know that the Johns Hopkins of the world is a nonprofit. They didn't know Cedar Mount Sinai was a nonprofit. Vanderbilt, these big entities, but they participate in 340B because they meet the qualifications. And there's other stipulations in that qualifications. They actually use an inpatient calculation to determine eligibility, which is weird because this is an outpatient program. But the senator in Utah, his name is Grassley, developed this calculation it made it a requirement to be eligible. So if you're a DSH hospital, you need this inpatient calculation that's based on your Medicare stays, your Medicaid stays, inpatient stays. That creates a DSH percentage, which is a formula that the government pays back to the hospital. So they use this arbitrary number of 11.75 as a percentage to meet for hospitals, for DSH hospitals. And then they lowered it to 8% for sole community rural referral centers. And since critical access hospitals don't bill on that type of format to Medicare, they don't have a percentage to meet. And the grantees don't either, since they don't bill. So it's a convoluted way to be eligible, and how the program evolved to the mixed use side of the business evolved. And so now we're seeing evolution again in the years 340B has been around.
So I'm gonna take it back like 50 steps because I'm obviously new to this. You are obviously an expert. So I apologize if I'm dumbing it down, but I want to make sure I understand this properly. Here's what you're telling me. You're telling me that there's certain hospitals that qualify. One of the criteria for those hospitals is they have to be a not-for-profit, right? We got that part right. Okay. Now, what they will qualify for basically a lower price for these drugs, is what you're telling me.
Yes.
These drugs are intended for outpatient use for the most part. Unfortunately, what's happened, I say unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, what's happened is that these hospitals or these healthcare organizations went, well, ER is outpatient and observation status outpatient, so maybe I can use 340B products for those statuses as well, for patients who are in those statuses as well.
That's correct.
So I followed you through that process. My question then is, I lost you at the DSH percentage. When is the DSH percentage used? Why is that is that the percentage of how your clients are split up, how your patients are split up, or what does that represent?
So to back that up, so it's an inpatient calculation on a Medicare cost report. So every hospital has to file a Medicare cost report annually. Okay. And when they file that cost report, they have to calculate what they call a DSH percentage, DSH payment adjustment, disproportionate share payment adjustment. So on their cost report, that calculation is actually based on the number of days of inpatient stay for Medicare and Medicaid patients. And so CMS gives a payment back to the hospitals based on their percentage. But somebody used that, and I believe it was Grassley from Utah. If you're from Utah, I believe he was the one who decided to use that arbitrary number percentage as a qualification metrics. And so to participate in 340B. So you have to meet an 11.75 percentage or higher burden to be eligible if you're a DSH hospital. If you're critical,
so what is the numerator and the denominator to understand the DSH percentage?
So that is a very difficult calculation, and that's what they use actuaries to do that, and not me.
Okay. So let me rephrase the question. What I'm really trying to understand is, so is it the number of Medicare patients versus the number of patients who might be eligible for basically a 340B program? Like,
nope, has nothing to do with outpatient services at all. It's an inpatient calculation.
Okay, so it is just so think of it basically as a magic number that pops up. And
right, that's calculated based on Medicare and Medicaid stays, inpatient bed stays at the hospital. So it's an actual formula that they use to calculate. But from the 340B perspective, is that number is what's used to make you eligible to participate in what type of entity you can be to participate. So if you're a DSH hospital, that number has to be 11.75 or higher. Okay. If you're a rural referral center, sole community hospital, you have to meet 8%.
8%.
So so just to give you a real life experience, I have a client that is a rural hospital. They may be about 50 beds, small little rural hospital, no man's land, Texas. So their numbers fluctuate. So technically they're a sole community hospital, but because their DSH percentage is above 11.75, they register as a DSH hospital. And the reason they do that is because there is some added implications for being a sole community hospital or rural referral center that you cannot buy drugs that have an orphan status at 340B. So they added, when that new legislation came out to allow those new hospitals into the 340B program, they added an extra prohibition to them. So they don't have the GPO prohibition, but they do have an orphan drug. They can't buy drugs that have orphan status. So I'm going to blast the company. Not sure if I can do it, but I will. So Genentech, who is one of the biggest manufacturers of orphan drugs, does not allow those hospital types to buy their drugs. Other manufacturers like Janssen, J&J, who have orphan drugs, give what they call a voluntary price. They can't say it's 340B, but they do match 340B pricing and allow those covered entities to buy at at 340B-like prices, those orphan drugs, but not Genentech.
Right. So let's ask that question, right? From and I'm not going to name names, but you are, and that's fine. What I'm going to ask is, what is the incentive for a company to provide the 340B pricing? It sounds like it's a no-win situation for them.
Right, it is a no-win situation for them. If they don't want to participate, if they don't want their drugs on a Medicare and Medicaid formulary, then
I'm talking about something like Genentech, who's basically not required to.
Oh, for the orphan drug, they saw no incentive in it. I guess they basically want to prohibit them from buying it at a 340B price. And so in that case, those are drugs that are typically brand drugs. They're not generic. So they're brand name drugs. So you can't even get a GPO price for some of those brand name drugs because they don't play ball with the GPOs. Right. So these hospitals are, unfortunately, if they have to buy those drugs, they're buying them at what we call typically a wholesale acquisition cost. It's a very high price and it's very unfortunate. And so I wish they would change their position. Hoping this broadcast will help some hospitals out there that would love to buy those drugs and help their patients and their patient population, but it's been years and they never budged. So
let's explore that. Sorry. So let's explore that a little bit. So what you're saying is there are certain drugs, especially rare disease state drugs, that are particularly problematic because patients want access to the drugs. The money doesn't actually go to the patient. The patients are not the ones who would pull out the money from their pockets to pay for the drugs. It would be money that goes into the hospital's pockets or the rural community, the community center's pockets. Is that correct, or am I wrong about that?
Right. So 340B as a benefit is stated in the Federal Register for covered entities to be able to take those resources and basically use those resources to whatever benefit that they find. necessary. So you have covered entities that will take that benefit and expand clinics. They'll add maybe a diabetes education clinic, coag, expand services. Some hospitals use it to pay down bad debt. They may use it to offset indigent care programs that they're running at their hospital. Sliding scale fee programs at the pharmacy so that they can pass on some savings. But there is no direction.
Or just keep the money. Or just keep the money.
Or they can keep the money. Exactly.
Right.
But there's no indication where they have to report those savings from in the hospital. And that's been a big contentious issue with Congress over 340B because they want transparency and to know how these hospitals are using those savings. That's what the manufacturers want. They want transparency. So when we look at the grantees, like the community health centers and other federal grantees, they have to report it on a line that's program income because they have to offset their dollars and cents in order to be re-eligible for their grants.
Interesting. Okay.
So, but the hospitals don't. So there's been a lot of arguments that maybe these hospitals should add it to their IRS 990 forms, stating this is how much we've saved in revenue from 340B. I don't see a problem with it, to be honest. I don't see a problem with that because they also see on that 990, here's how much charitable spend in bad debt.
Right, exactly. So what I hear you saying is that this could be, if in the end, the person that's supposed to benefit from all of this is always the patient. That's really, both you and I as pharmacists, that's where we start from, right? We start with the perspective that patients need to benefit. My question for you is, hold on. I already have a comment. So I'm going to stop my comment and I'm going to read out this one from Erica Devine. I think 340B is fascinating. Appreciate your overview since it's so complex. The program is explored in terms of covered entities and contracted pharmacies and see compensatory responses from all players. Discriminatory reimbursement, duplicate discounting, transparency on how money is spent. In your opinion, how do we control for these to ensure the program truly keeps patient needs at the center?
So, wow, that's a really loaded one. And that's a great question. And so, again, it's going to be my opinion. Of course. So, there is a lot of complexity and we want to see the benefit naturally handed to the patient. So one of the key things is that manufacturers already do offer patient assistance programs to enable patients to receive who are underinsured or uninsured. So there are those programs out there from the manufacturers. This benefit was solely for the entity. So there are things that these covered entities have to do in a compliance world, and that's what I do professionally, is audit and consult to make sure that they are following the guidelines that are outlined by HRSA and OPA to keep them in line and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do to keep the program solvent. So pharma is trying to find holes in how to basically dismantle the program because remember, pharma is for profit. They are not for profit. They have shareholders. They have people to report to. And if we look at, there was actually some publication, and I can't name it right off the top of my head, that just showed how much pharma's revenue increased in the last year during this whole contract pharmacy issue that's currently going on now by them denying sales in contract pharmacy. Sure, we've seen the growth of contract pharmacy explode over the years. March of 2010 is when HRSA opened the floodgates, as I like to call it, and allowed covered entities to go from one contract pharmacy arrangement to multiple. And they put in, it's basically an infinite number that these hospitals can have. I had one client that had 110 contract pharmacy relationships.
Wow.
Yes. So it's huge. And it was a huge academic medical center, and their revenue was in the 10 to 12 million a year in revenue. So, but what do they do with that revenue? They opened several medication therapy management clinics for pharmacists to be able to help patients, keep patients compliant on their drug therapy, because then by opening these clinics, they're actually able to then decrease readmissions, hospital, ER visits, unnecessary visits, and actually even pass on some savings in, like I said, in a sliding scale fee program. So maybe their insulin is only $1 copay or whatever. So hospitals found unique ways to make sure that it's coming back to the patient. And I like when I see that happen at an organization. I tell them, build this, your mission statement, build it into your policies so that they understand where these revenue and where these dollars are actually going.
This is so interesting, and we can keep going. I'm at 25 minutes already, and I feel like we literally haven't touched the surface because I don't even think we're like glazing the surface yet, because one of the things I really wanted to get into was the decisions that came out in the last week. And you've been talking to clients about this. So we're well past time. I usually aim these to be about 15, 20 minutes, and you are well past that. But let's sort of address that generally speaking. What happened in the last week around the court decisions, and what was the impact of that, and where are we now?
Great question. And it's actually exploded. So there's been several pharma companies and there's, I believe, 8 manufacturers that are currently denying 340B pricing to contract pharmacy relationships. And some of them decided, like the most recent, Boehringer Ingelheim, decided to allow a covered entity to have one contract pharmacy relationship. Even though your patients are going everywhere, but you're only allowed one. So they're denying the sale for those other contract pharmacy relationships. Revenue has shown they exploded over the last year due to this denial of pricing. So actually there was three judges that just handed down an opinion. We had a judge in DC Friday night to hand down an opinion, and the Novartis and United Therapeutics lawsuit basically upholding pharma's position. So that muddied the water, because it's like, okay, what about the statute? So, and about the PPA, the pricing agreement. So in Indianapolis and I believe New Jersey, that's Lilly's lawsuit in Indianapolis and Novo Nordisk and Sanofi's lawsuit in New Jersey. Those judges' opinion was that pharma had actually violated the PPA. So by violating it, but they still didn't say they believe HHS is legally sound to still force the manufacturers to offer 340B pricing. So we're still in a muddy water right now with these lawsuits, and HHS has a lot to do on their end. One thing we know, HRSA does not have rulemaking authority. That has to be a congressional act. It's not something that CMS can hand down. So it will take an act of Congress. And we already know what's going on with Congress to give rulemaking authority to HRSA so that they can force laws to make these manufacturers adhere to the guidances and the opinions that they pass down.
So I'm conceding the fact that I'm not a HRSA expert for sure. However, the fact is that HRSA is an agency just like any other. And the FDA cannot pass laws, for example, but the FDA does have rulemaking authority. It does passes regulations all the time. And then there are guidances that are non-binding. I just want to make sure, and again, this may not be a question for you. This might be a question for another lawyer, and I'll ask the lawyer the question whenever I meet one that does this kind of work. But you point out pointedly that HRSA does not have rulemaking authority. Do you mean that they've been really promulgating via guidance for the most part, and that's been the problem?
That's the problem. Guidance and opinions.
Okay.
So
which for the most part, even the FDA's guidances are literally the FDA's opinion the guidance starts off by saying this is not binding on any party, including the FDA. Mm-hmm. I haven't read the HRSA ones, but I imagine it says something to that effect.
I don't even believe it says that it's not binding. So they push this out as enforcement actions, and that's why pharma is suing. So so when they decided to go from one contract pharmacy to multiple, that was where pharma.
That was a unilateral decision by HRSA as an agency to decide if that's okay. Okay, that's where the problem came about.
That's where it's coming from. So since there is no rule that HRSA can pass to say, this is law, this is our rule, you have to abide, pharma challenged it. Took them 11 years to do it, but they challenged it. So 10 years to do it. I mean, this happened in March of 2010. So I guess with the explosion and they see the dip in their pharmaceutical sales, they're getting a little nervous. They want to make sure their fifth generation of children has that financial gain, because again, remember, they're for profit. So you want to make sure those shareholders are, meeting, and they haven't had an issue in years meeting their shareholder burden, but they feel that this is out of hand. And there's another layer to it. You got the PBM industry. That's another complexity. So the PBMs are fighting for their rebates, and the manufacturer is telling them, no, we gave it as a 340B rebate, so now we don't have to pay you, PBM. So the PBMs are at it. And there's going to be excuse the term for lack of better, there's going to be soon a come to Jesus between the covered entities, the PBMs, and pharma.
But why do you think this isn't the come to Jesus moment? It sounds like last week was a come to Jesus moment.
But it's still muddied. So
right.
I mean,
I didn't say Jesus is the answer. I'm just saying Jesus, you came. Jesus kind of went. It's a little so much. We're still going to leave it muddy. You guys can figure this shit out. Sorry.
Right. So somebody's got to figure it out. And somebody has to find what will make common ground and common sense among everyone. And so that's really why I think pharma definitely stopped the contract pharmacy sales, was more so because of the pushback from the PBMs. Because they're like, hey, we're paying two rebates. We're paying one to 340B, and then we're turning around and we're paying one to pharma, to PBM land. And PBMs have no transparency. That's a whole nother conversation. But there's no transparency in the PBM space, and they're for-profit as well. So here we go. We have two for-profit industries, coming down on the backs of the nonprofit industry, the covered entities. Who's going to win this battle? I don't know.
But here's the fundamental thing, and I'm going to challenge you on this. Nonprofit does not make a profit. It just means does not distribute a profit. So they could be making potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in profit, just not distributing to shareholders.
Exactly.
So the argument it's not for profit is a little bit of a money.
It is, but at the same token, most covered entities, and I'm being really clear on this part, most covered entities are safety net hospitals. They are the safety nets of the communities. Even though I did name a couple of big guys out there, they are usually the community hospital that is picking up the most uninsured and underinsured patients.
So I think that's a great point to make. So I think the question comes down to who's actually benefiting. And before Erica asked the question, I was sort of starting to get into this a little bit, which was, and I'm sorry, I'm well past time, but I want to kind of, this is so fun. In the end, if you come at it from the perspective of who needs to benefit, in the end, across every single group we're talking about, the one common thing is the patient needs to benefit. The patient needs to come out ahead. And how that happens is, there are 100 ways to skin that cat. It's not skinning cats, but ignoring that part of it. When it comes to a 340B program for a hospital that is really serving the community, and this allows for access, I think there's a really good argument to be made that, you know what, pharma, you need to really help that hospital help the patients.
Right.
On the other hand, if you are a huge hospital in Kansas City and you are benefiting, chances are it's not necessarily, and I'm not pointing fingers for sure because I've never seen their finances, but you're not necessarily benefiting the patients from that. This could be paying for lawsuits, for example, that you incurred. And there's nothing wrong with that either. That's just the cost of doing business. But the point being that the request for transparency might be addressing that exact question. How are you address? Would you pointed out Genentech? Would Genentech would be hard pressed to reject a 340B like payment if everyone had to be more transparent about what you're doing with the money that Genentech's giving up.
Right, and that's been pharma's argument for the longest. They want to see where the dollars are going, but they're also harming at the same time. And they believe, well, because we do a patient assistance program, we're still helping the uninsured and underinsured. There's a lot of legalities to patient assistance. I used to run a patient assistance program at a large IDN. There's the
qualifications you can meet,
the qualifications, and some of that is that they have to be U.S. citizens. And so you have a lot of patients that fall out of that algorithm. They're not U.S. citizens. They don't qualify for traditional patient assistance. So they come to the safety net, and then they expect to get their medication. But how can they get it if they can't afford a $2,000 chemotherapy, oral therapy drug? They can't afford that. So, and they don't qualify for the patient assistance. So guess where they end up? At one of these 340B safety net hospitals who has to take care of that patient. They can't turn them away. You know, the for-profit hospital down the street ain't going to take them.
But could a not-for-profit turn down a patient who has a chronic disease state? I know you can't turn them away in an acute disease state, but I thought you can't turn them away for chronic.
I believe they can. They can, but most of the safety net's mission is to be there. They are the safety net. So they take in the uninsured, the non-resident, non-U.S. citizen patients and help them. So they are the ones who are shouldering, okay, this patient can't pay. So they create those sliding scale fee programs. Okay, contribute $5, $0 based on their financial status. And that's where most of those 340B dollars end up going into programs like that. Should there be, like I said, a line on the IRS form explaining what they're doing with those dollars? Maybe so. And are they padding some of that bad debt? Because, they have a ton of it. Especially in safety nets, they have a ton of bad debt, non-paid bills. Yeah, they're probably using those dollars that way too. Would I like to see that? I actually would like to see more transparency myself. Maybe that will get Genentech and other manufacturers and pharma to calm it down just a little bit.
Have their coming to Jesus moment, as you put it.
Exactly.
I work a lot with pharma, and I like to think that they're still working with the best interest of patients at hand. But I think in the end, we need to all make sure that patients are being taken care of. And I think we're just all looking at it from just different angles on how we help patients. So this was amazing. This was incredible. So again, Rita, this was amazing. I hope you will consider coming back. I have a couple of questions for you, by the way. Would you be open to answering them?
Sure, go ahead.
The first question, and I've been sort of putting this up the whole time, how can people reach you?
So my company is Integrated Pharmacy Service Incorporated. They can reach me at www.ipsconsults.com. That's my website. There is a contact form there that they could communicate. Or they can reach me directly via email at rita.baskett@ipsconsults.com. Or my phone number. I take business calls too, 704-408-1744. If you're covered in it out there and you need 340B support, you can contact me. Or if you're a manufacturer, I work with manufacturers. I work with PBMs. I work with basically everyone in the 340B space. So I have experience educating, teaching, providing consulting support, everything in the realm of 340B. So please reach out. I'd love to help you.
So I'm just curious. You said you work with manufacturers. Do you find which department do you land up working with? Is it medical affairs? Is it supply chain? Is it patients? What do you think?
Interesting. The manufacturers that I have helped in more of an education role actually went to the C-suite on a couple of smaller manufacturers. They wanted to understand why they have to offer this price. And it's usually the sales teams that bring this up because they're trying to figure out their market basket and figure out their pricing strategies. And 340B is always their stumbling block. So I've worked with some specialty manufacturers, oncology space, life sciences, different manufacturers doing educational support, just trying to teach them what this program truly is about.
That sounds amazing. Okay, so my next question for you, based on the conversation we've had so far, what would you like to ask the audience?
What I would like to ask the audience is to do some more advocacy, because that's the only way 340B will change. So there are advocacy organizations out there for all covered entity types. You have, 340B Health for hospitals. You have the Community Health Center organization, NAC. You have several advocacy organizations that all advocate for the program. So they can give you tools, they can give you the resources to speak to your senators, your House of Representatives, and talk to them about the importance of the program for your community. And that's what I always like to ask. Dig your feet in advocacy.
That's awesome. Here's another question for you. What's something you learned in the last month?
I learned that off the 340B topic, I learned that selling houses and moving is one of the worst things you can ever do. You probably see some boxes in the background. I'm in a transition right now, and remodeling a house. Oh my gosh, I never realized how much work it takes to do a full gut remodel. So I'm learning to be a interior decorator. I said I might as well add that to the end of my pharmacist and my master's degree. Now I'm almost an interior decorator.
I'm about to move, so I feel you. Not looking forward to that. That should be interesting. Let's ask this question. What's something that made you happy in the last week?
Which made me happy. Funny enough, I have a daughter that's a tennis player, and her school got to the state finals, and they lost. But what made me happy was that she played her heart out and she won her match. So,
good for her. There you go.
And very so cool. It's I'm trying to create a budding next Serena Williams. I'm trying my hardest. So she makes me smile when I see her play her best.
That's awesome. I was actually at the Will Smith was in Philadelphia yesterday. Ooh. And he was doing a talk on, he released a new book called Will. I have no idea why I'm plugging him. I don't think he needs my plug. But the first thing was the trailer for the movie he's doing on Venus
King
and Serena.
Richard.
King Richard, yeah. Exactly. So it's funny you were talking about the tennis thing because it all popped up and it was just very fresh in my mind. Last question.
Yes.
What is something most people don't know about you?
Oh, interesting. I'm kind of an open book. If you know me, you know something you don't know about me. I don't know. I think I'm really an open book. There's not
okay, let's rephrase the question. What's something I don't know about you?
Okay, something you may not know about me. That I am an avid world traveler. Maybe that's
something. There you go. Me too. Where was the last place you went?
Say again?
Where was the last place you went?
Oh, good question. It was pre-COVID. So,
of course.
Internationally. Yeah. I'll put it this way. I would say my most eye-opening trip was my trip to Colombia, South America.
I love it. I love it.
It is not a destination. I like to travel to places that are not your traditional vacation spot. And so I actually found my retirement city, which is Medellin, that I plan to hopefully relocate within the next 5 years. So that may be something no one knows about me, that I plan to take up residence in Colombia in 5 years.
I've heard incredible things about Medellin. I've never been. I was talking to some Colombians, and they actually told me the most beautiful women in the world are in Medellin. I was like, I will take your word on it.
It is beautiful. The city is a renaissance, and people don't know until they get there, and you're like, all they know is Pablo Escobar. That's the only thing they know associated with Medellin. And I'm like, they don't even want you to mention his name when you get there. That's how removed and anything associated with him, they've destroyed. So They don't want that image. They want you to know that they're a Renaissance city, building a big expat community there of Americans. And the only hiccup that I have, because I only passed 2 years of Spanish in high school. We're not going to talk about that third year.
No, not at all.
So my Spanish is un poquito, very small. But I am working on it with my daughter. She's taking Spanish because you really need to be, to me, bilingual to live. You can survive on Google Translate, but you can't live in Medellin. Other cities, maybe a little bit more English is spoken, but I found Medellin to be completely Spanish. And it's a good Spanish. And so it's easier to understand and follow along.
Rita, this was amazing. This was a great conversation. I do hope you'll consider coming back because there's so much more to discuss.
Definitely. You have me.
Awesome. Thank you again for being a guest. Good. I'm glad.